Dr. Marsh didn't say a word. He just kept looking at the printout, then at me, then back at the printout, like he was hoping the numbers would rearrange themselves into something easier to say. My grandson Tyler was curled up against my chest, 6 years old, out cold, and it wasn't naptime sleep. It was 3:40 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, and this was the third time in 2 weeks I'd watched that boy go from wide awake to unconscious in the space of 20 minutes. Mr. Callahan, he finally said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Has Tyler had anything to eat or drink in the last hour that you didn't give him yourself? I looked down at my grandson's face, slack and pale against my flannel shirt, and I felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. He had a juice pouch, I said. His stepdad gave it to him before I picked him up. Dr. Marsh nodded slowly, like that answer confirmed something he'd already been afraid of. I'm going to need you to sit tight for a few minutes, he said. We're going to run a full panel. Welcome to Grandpa's last stand. If you're here, it's because you already know how this works. The people in these stories always get exactly what they deserve, one way or another. Hit subscribe if you haven't, drop a like, and let's get into it, because this one still keeps me up some nights. Let me take you back to where this actually started, because none of what I'm about to tell you happened the way I expected it to. My name's Walter Callahan. I'm 68 years old, retired now, but I spent 31 years as a claims adjuster for an insurance company out of Scranton, Pennsylvania. The kind of job where you learn to read people, because half of what people tell you when something's gone wrong isn't the truth. It's the version of the truth they want you to believe. You get good at spotting the gap between the two. I didn't know that skill was going to end up being the thing that saved my grandson's life, but that's how it goes sometimes. You spend 3 decades building a tool for one purpose, and then life hands you a completely different nail to hit with it. My son Marcus is 34. Good kid, well, man now, but I still see the boy in him. He works in logistics, does well for himself, married his college girlfriend, and then, 6 years after that ended in divorce, he married again. Her name was Renata. She had a son from her first marriage, Tyler, who was 4 when she and Marcus got together, and is 6 now. Marcus adopted him legally, about a year into the marriage. As far as Tyler's concerned, and as far as I'm concerned, that's my grandson. Blood's got nothing to do with it. I loved that boy from the first afternoon I met him, when he was still small enough to fall asleep on my shoulder during a Phillies game and drool clean through my shirt. Here's the thing about Renata that I want to be fair about, because fair matters even when you're furious, maybe especially then. She wasn't cruel, she wasn't cold. When I first met her, she struck me as tired in a way that went bone deep, the kind of tired that comes from being a single mother for 3 years, with a family that didn't help much, and an ex-husband who disappeared the second the ink dried on the paperwork. Marcus swept in at the right moment, steady and reliable, and I understood why she fell for him. I liked her. I want that on the record before I tell you the rest of this, because it makes what happened harder to swallow, not easier. It was the 3rd week of September when I first noticed something was off with Tyler. Marcus travels for work, sometimes gone 8-9 days at a stretch, running logistics contracts up and down the East Coast. And on those weeks I usually pick Tyler up from school on Wednesdays and keep him until Renata gets off her shift at the hospital, where she works front desk. It's been our thing since he started kindergarten. We get burgers, we do homework at my kitchen table. Sometimes we watch the History Channel because that kid, God love him, developed an obsession with World War II submarines that I still don't fully understand, but I encourage every chance I get. That Wednesday, the 3rd week of September, I picked him up and he seemed fine in the car, chattering about a kid named Deshaun who'd brought a lizard to show and tell. But by the time we got to my house, maybe 15 minutes later, he'd gone quiet. Not shy quiet, heavy quiet. He sat down on my couch, and by the time I came back from the kitchen with his snack, he was asleep, sitting up, chin on his chest, at 4:15 in the afternoon. I figured he was coming down with something. Kids get sick, that's what kids do. I let him sleep, called Renata to give her a heads up, and when she picked him up that evening, she said the same thing, probably a bug, keep an eye on him. I didn't think much more about it, but it happened again the following Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that. 3 weeks in a row, like clockwork. Same pattern, bright and talkative in the car, and within 20 minutes of arriving at my house, gone, out cold. And here's what started nagging at me. The thing my 31 years of reading people wouldn't let me set down. It was never at school. His teacher, when I asked, casually, pretending to just be making conversation at pickup, told me Tyler was one of her most alert kids, never had trouble staying awake, never needed the nurse. It was never on the weekends when Marcus was home. Either Marcus would have said something, I know, my son. It was specifically, only, every single time, on the Wednesdays, I picked him up. The Wednesday after that, the fourth one, I decided to pay closer attention. I picked him up from school, same as always. But instead of driving straight to my house, I asked him, casual as I could manage, Hey bud, you have anything to eat or drink before I got there? Snack, juice, anything? He thought about it. Grandpa Rick gave me a juice pouch, he said. The blue kind. Grandpa Rick. That was new to me. I asked who that was, and Tyler explained, in the matter-of-fact way 6-year-olds explain things that are apparently completely normal to them, that Grandpa Rick was Renata's new friend who came over sometimes when Mommy was at work, and that he was nice, and that he always gave Tyler a juice pouch for the road right before Grandpa Walter picked him up. I want to tell you that alarm bells went off right then. Sirens, the whole production. They didn't, not exactly. What I felt was quieter than that, and honestly, colder. It was the same feeling I used to get 30 years ago reading a claims file where all the numbers technically lined up, but something about the shape of the story didn't sit right. A feeling in my gut that said, this doesn't add up, and you already know it doesn't add up. You're just not ready to say why, out loud yet. I didn't say anything to Tyler. I took him home, and sure enough, 25 minutes later, he was asleep on my couch at 4:20 in the afternoon, and this time I sat next to him, and I watched him sleep, and I didn't touch my newspaper or the TV remote or anything else. I just watched my grandson breathe, slow and heavy, in a sleep that didn't belong to a healthy 6-year-old boy on a Wednesday afternoon, and I made a decision right there on that couch. The next Wednesday, I wasn't going to wait to see what happened. I was going to know. That week, I got to the school 15 minutes early. I sat in my truck in the pickup line, and I watched the front doors, and when Tyler came out with his backpack and his lunchbox, I got out and met him halfway across the lot instead of waiting in the car line like usual. Hey, bud, I said. No juice pouch today, okay? Grandpa Walter's got some cold water in the truck for you. He looked at me a little confused, like I'd broken some rule he didn't know I was allowed to break, but he nodded and climbed in. That Wednesday, for the first time in a month, Tyler didn't fall asleep at my house. He ate 2 hot dogs, beat me at 3 rounds of Uno, and talked my ear off about submarines, until Renata picked him up at 6:30, wide awake, bright-eyed, completely himself. That was the moment I stopped wondering and started knowing. I didn't say anything to Renata that night. I want to be honest with you about why, because I think it matters. Part of me, a big part, wanted to be wrong. I wanted there to be some innocent explanation, some allergy medicine for a rash I didn't know about, something a doctor had prescribed that nobody had thought to mention to me. I've been wrong before, in 31 years of reading people, and I've learned the hard way that acting on a hunch before you've got proof doesn't protect anybody. It just burns the bridge you needed to cross to get the truth. So the following Wednesday, I did something I'm not entirely proud of, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I let Tyler take the juice pouch from Grandpa Rick. I didn't ask questions in front of him. I just watched, quiet, the way you watch a gauge you already suspect is broken. And 20 minutes after we got to my house, he went under again, same as always, and this time, before I let him sleep it off, I did what I should have done 3 weeks earlier. I drove him straight to the emergency clinic on Route 6, the one Dr. Marsh runs, the same doctor who'd stitched Tyler's chin back in kindergarten when he split it open on the jungle gym. I told the front desk it was urgent, and when they called us back, and Dr. Marsh looked at Tyler slumped against my shoulder, dead weight, breathing slow and shallow, he didn't hesitate. He ordered blood work and a full toxicology screen, and he told me to sit tight. That's where I started this story. 4 full seconds of silence in that little exam room, Dr. Marsh looking at that printout like he wished it said something else. Mr. Callahan, he finally said, sitting down across from me. Tyler's blood work shows the presence of clonazepam. That's a prescription sedative. The brand name you might know is Klonopin. It's not something that belongs in a 6-year-old system under any normal circumstance, and the levels here aren't consistent with an accidental exposure. This looks like a repeated, deliberate dosing pattern, likely going back at least a month, based on how his body's metabolizing it. I sat there, and I made myself breathe slow, in through my nose, out through my mouth, the way I used to steady myself before walking into a room to tell some family their claim had been denied. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked. "Physically, yes. He'll sleep it off same as before, and there's no sign of long-term organ damage from what we're seeing today. But Mr. Callahan, I have to tell you, I'm a mandated reporter. What I'm looking at, I'm required by law to report to Child Protective Services and likely the police." "I understand," I said. "I need 24 hours. He studied me for a long moment, the same way you study a man you're trying to decide whether to trust. 24 hours, he said finally, and then I make the call myself, whether you've moved or not. I mean that." "Understood," I said. "Thank you." I carried Tyler out to my truck. He didn't wake up the whole drive home, and I remember gripping that wheel doing exactly the speed limit, 45 and a 45, because I could not physically survive, getting pulled over and having to explain to some 26-year-old state trooper why my unconscious grandson was in my passenger seat. I got him home, got him settled in the guest room I keep made up for him, and I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a cup of coffee that went cold before I touched it, and I did what I know how to do. I built a file. 31 years of adjusting claims teaches you that the difference between an accusation and a case is documentation. Feelings don't win anything. Paper does. So I wrote down everything, in order: the dates I remembered him falling asleep, the pattern of Wednesdays, the name Grandpa Rick, the juice pouches, tonight's diagnosis. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that kitchen with the lamp on low, and I thought the way I used to think through a fraud investigation. What do I actually know? What do I still need to prove? And what's the smartest order to go get it in? What I knew: somebody was drugging my grandson, repeatedly, deliberately, every single Wednesday for going on a month. What I didn't know yet: who Rick actually was, and why. The why was the part that gnawed at me worst of all, same as it would gnaw at anyone. Because Renata wasn't cruel. I'd watched that woman coach Tyler through a nasty ear infection 2 winters back, up all night with a fever thermometer, and a worried look on her face that wasn't for show. Whatever this was, I didn't think it was hatred, and somehow that made it worse, not better, because it meant something in her life had gotten so tangled up that hurting her own son had started to look, to her, like the easier road. Thursday morning, I called Marcus, not to tell him everything. I wasn't ready for that, and more importantly, he wasn't ready for that. I needed to know what he already knew, or suspected, before I handed him something that was going to break his whole world open. He picked up on the second ring, already sounded awake, even though it was barely 7. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" "Fine, son. Question for you: how's Tyler been sleeping lately? You notice anything?" There was a pause, the kind that tells you a man's actually turning something over in his head instead of just being polite. Renata mentioned he's been more tired than usual. She thinks it's a growth spurt, maybe the start of allergy season messing with him. Growth spurt. Same excuse, dressed up different. "Makes sense," I said, keeping my voice easy. "Listen, would it be all right if he stayed with me this weekend? I've been wanting more time with him, and I feel like I've been slacking on the submarine documentaries." I could hear him smile through the phone. "He'd love that, Dad. Let me check with Renata, but I don't see why not." By 9 that morning, I was sitting across from Denise Ferrara, a family attorney I'd used years back when we settled my late wife Carol's estate, a woman who doesn't waste a single word and doesn't need to. I laid everything out on her desk, Doctor. Marcia's report, my notes, the dates. She read through it without interrupting, then took off her glasses. "Walter, you understand what you're looking at here?" "I do. This is child endangerment, and depending on what you find out about the duration and the substance source, it could go a lot further than that. Who else knows?" "You, me, the doctor." "Not Marcus?" "Not yet." She nodded slowly. Good instinct. When a man finds out something like this about his wife, his first move is almost always denial. His brain will hunt for any explanation that lets him keep believing the life he thought he had. You want the proof airtight enough that denial isn't an option left on the table. What do you need next? Who's Rick? I said. And where the medication's coming from? She slid a card across the desk. Pete Nowak. Private investigator. Works out of Wilkes-Barre. Does a lot of family and custody cases. He's fast, and he's discreet. Then she leaned forward. One more thing. When Marcus calls back about Tyler staying with you, say yes immediately, and get that boy out of that house as much as you possibly can, between now and when this breaks. Already planned on it, I said. Marcus called back at 11 that morning. Tyler was mine for the weekend, no questions asked. Renata had apparently said it sounded like a nice idea, without asking a single follow-up question about why, which told me something all on its own. I picked him up Friday after school. He came out with his backpack and a stuffed submarine. I'm not making that up. The boy has a plush yellow submarine he calls Nautilus tucked under his arm, and he was full of energy the whole ride to my place. No juice pouch in sight, because I made sure of that myself this time. Pete Nowak called me Saturday evening. Stocky guy, quiet way about him, the kind of man who could stand in a grocery store checkout line and you'd never once notice him, which I imagine is exactly the point of the job. We met at a diner off Route 315. He slid a folder across the table before he'd even finished his coffee order. Inside were photographs. Time-stamped, clean, unambiguous. Renata and a man not a stranger to her, a man named Richard Del Vecchio, 41 years old, who it turned out was not a family friend at all, but a nurse practitioner who worked the same floor at the hospital where Renata worked the front desk. Grandpa Rick wasn't a grandpa. He was Rick. How long? I asked. Best I can trace it, about 5 months, Pete said. There's a extended stay motel off the 81 corridor they've used at least 6 times that I could document, always matching up with days Marcus was traveling. 5 months. I did the math without wanting to, and it lined up with when Tyler's Wednesday naps had started, near enough. He's a nurse practitioner, I said slowly, the pieces sliding into place the way they do in a file once you finally see the shape of it. He'd have access. He'd have access, Pete confirmed, and more than that, he'd know exactly what dose wouldn't leave a mark that anybody but a full tox screen would catch. This wasn't guesswork. Somebody who knew pharmacology picked that substance and that dosage on purpose. I sat with that for a long moment, the diner noise fading out around me, the coffee going cold in my hands, same as it had 2 nights running now. She hadn't done this out of cruelty. Pete's read on it, and mine too, by the time we were done talking, was that it had started as convenience Tyler underfoot, on the one weekday afternoon, when the timing lined up for her and Rick to be together without anyone asking questions, and a nurse practitioner boyfriend who had both the means and, apparently, not nearly enough conscience to say no when she asked him for a way to make her son sleep through it. Does Rick know Tyler's autistic, I mean? Does he know anything about Tyler at all? I asked, still trying to find some sliver of this that made a shred of moral sense. Pete shook his head. From what I could piece together, he's been told Tyler's a handful, hard to manage, doesn't nap on his own anymore. That's it. He's never asked a single follow-up question, as far as I can tell. Coward, I thought. Simple as that. A man with the training to understand exactly what he was doing to a 6-year-old's developing nervous system, and he'd asked nothing, because asking nothing let him keep telling himself a story where he wasn't the villain. I drove home that night with the windows cracked, October air coming in sharp and cold the way it does in northeastern Pennsylvania once the leaves really start turning, and I thought about 31 years of claims files, about how the ones that broke your heart weren't the ones where somebody set out to do evil. They were the ones where ordinary people, under enough pressure, talked themselves into believing that a small wrong was the price of keeping something they wanted. That didn't make it forgivable. It just made it human, and somehow that was worse to sit with, not easier. Tyler was asleep in my guest room when I got home, the real kind of sleep this time, safe and natural, Nautilus tucked under one arm. I stood in the doorway, and watched him breathe for a minute before I went to the kitchen table and kept writing in that legal pad. Every detail Pete had given me, in order, in my own hand, same as I'd have built a claims file 30 years ago. Then I called Denise and left a message. We're ready to move. Marcus came by Sunday evening, around 6:30, still in the good mood of a man who thought he was just stopping by for dinner with his father and his son. I'd made pot roast, the same meal I'd made him every hard week of his life. When his mother passed, when his first marriage ended, when he didn't get into the program he wanted at Penn State. He never asked why I always cooked that particular meal on the particular days everything fell apart. Some things you just do without explaining them. Tyler was already down for the night, in the guest room. I'd made sure of that, because what was about to happen at my table wasn't for a 6-year-old's ears. Not that night. Not ever, if I could help it. Marcus sat down, looked around, smiled. Smells great, Dad. What's the occasion? Eat first, I said. He gave me a look, the one he's been giving me since he was about 14, the one that means you're being weird, old man. But he picked up his fork anyway. We ate. I let him finish his plate. Have seconds. Let him be a comfortable, unsuspecting man for another 20 minutes before I had to take that away from him. Then I got up, went to the counter, and set 3 things down in front of him without a word. Dr. Marsh's report, my legal pad, and Pete's folder. He looked at the papers, then at me. Dad, what is this? Read it, I said. All of it. Then we'll talk. He picked up the medical report first, slow, the way a man picks up something he already senses he doesn't want to be holding. I watched his face while he read. It didn't crumple. It just went very still, the way water goes still right before something breaks the surface of it. He set it down, picked up my notes next, read those 2, and then he opened Pete's folder, and the photographs were right there on top. He closed it after the second one. My kitchen got so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. Then Marcus stood up, slow and controlled, and said, "Excuse me a minute," and walked down the hall to the bathroom and shut the door. I sat at that table and I waited. Take your time, son. Take every minute you need. He was in there a long while, long enough I refilled my coffee. Long enough the kitchen clock ticked through what felt like a full 10 minutes. When he came back out, his eyes were red-rimmed, but his voice, when he finally used it, was steady. "Does Tyler know what's been happening to him?" he asked. "No," I said. "He just knows the juice makes him sleepy, and he doesn't like it much." Marcus nodded once, slow, jaw tight. "Good. He doesn't need to know more than that." And right there, I saw my son clearly for the first time in weeks, not the exhausted, traveling husband who'd filed his own boy's slow eyes and heavy limbs under growth spurt because his wife told him to. The father underneath that. He just needed somebody to hand him the truth in a form he couldn't argue his way out of. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since Wednesday." He looked up sharp. "You've been sitting on this since Wednesday?" "I needed it airtight before I brought it to you, Marcus. I didn't want to hand you something you could still talk yourself out of believing." He was quiet a moment, and then he let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. Almost, but not quite. 31 years reading insurance files, and you build a whole case before you even tell your own son his kid's in danger. "Force of habit," I said. "Doesn't make it wrong." He looked at the folder one more time, then pushed it aside and pulled out his phone. "I need that lawyer's number," he said. "That's my boy." Marcus didn't drive home that night or the next. He stayed at my place through the weekend, sleeping in his old childhood bedroom, eating breakfast across from Tyler every morning, just watching him, really watching him, the way you watch something you almost lost, and are only now understanding you almost lost it. He spoke with Denise twice more, moved some money into an account Renata didn't have access to, quietly photographed documents from the home office on a visit back to the house while Renata was at work. All of it careful, methodical, without a single wasted motion. I don't know where he learned to move like that. I'd like to think some of it's mine. Monday morning, he waited until Tyler was safely at school. I drove him myself, walked him right up to the front office, made sure with my own eyes he was signed in, and then Marcus drove to the house in Dunmore and sat down across the kitchen table from Renata. The same table, he told me later, where she'd photographed her coffee mug for social media that very morning with some caption about Monday motivation. She looked up from her laptop and smiled, easy, normal, like it was any other Monday of her life. He slid the medical report across the table first. He told me he watched that smile come apart in real time. She started explaining before he'd said a single word. That was her first mistake, he said, going straight to justification, instead of even asking what he already knew. Marcus, I can explain. He just wasn't sleeping well and I was so exhausted and... He let the silence sit there. Then he put the folder down, photographs on top. She went completely still. I trusted you, Marcus told her, and he said his voice never once rose the whole conversation, which is more than I think I could have managed. With my son, with my house, with my name. He stood up. You used every single one of those. Marcus, please. Tyler is my son too. I love him. I would never. You drugged him, he said, for months, so you'd have time with Rick. He picked his keys up off the counter she'd have wiped down that morning without a single hair out of place. Whatever story you're building for yourself right now about why that's okay, that's yours to carry, not mine and not his. He walked to the door. She asked him, quiet, if he was going to take Tyler from her. He stopped, turned around one last time. You did that, he said, not me. And he walked out. I want to tell you how it ended, and I want to tell you the real version, not the version with a soundtrack, because that's not how justice actually arrives. It arrives slow, on paper, through a family court in Lackawanna County that doesn't care one bit about drama, only about evidence. Full physical custody was awarded to Marcus 53 days after he walked out of that kitchen. Renata's attorney tried to argue exhaustion, postpartum adjacent stress, a rough patch in the marriage that never should have escalated the way it did. Denise put Dr. Marsh's report on the record, laid out the toxicology results, laid out 5 months of documented motel visits, and a pharmacy trail that Pete had traced back to a colleague of Rick's who'd been filling prescriptions under a name that wasn't Tyler's. The judge didn't need much time with any of it. Supervised visitation only, pending a full CPS review, child endangerment charges filed by the district attorney's office. Richard Delvecchio lost his nursing license within the month, once the state board got wind of what he'd been party to, and when investigators reached out to him, he cooperated fully and immediately, gave them everything, dates and messages and every ugly detail, handed Renata over without a second thought the instant it looked like it might cost him something. Some men are cowards straight through, start to finish. The house in Dunmore sold that winter as part of the divorce settlement, and what Renata walked away with was a fraction of the life she'd built her whole identity around. No explosion, no scene at the courthouse steps, just paperwork, signature by signature, the way real endings actually happen. Tyler's back to himself now. Full nights of real sleep, a whole new obsession with something called a bathyscaphe that I had to look up myself, and Wednesdays are ours again, the way they were always supposed to be. No juice pouches from anybody but me, and I check every single one myself before it goes anywhere near that boy, and I don't feel one bit foolish about that, not for one single second, and I never will. If this one hit you the way it hit me telling it, do me a favor and hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're listening from. And subscribe if you haven't yet. It costs you nothing, and it means the world to a story like this, finding the people who need to hear it. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.